The divorce lawyer's office smelled like leather, old paper, and the slow death of a 10-year marriage. I sat at the conference table, my hands folded on the cold mahogany surface, watching my soon-to-be ex-husband Julian Sharp sign his name on the final document with a flourish of a man who believed he was winning. He looked up at me, his Montblanc pen still hovering, his smile the particular smile of someone who had spent a decade draining another human being dry and was proud of the results. "You know, Camille," he said, "I almost feel sorry for you, almost 10 years of marriage, and what do you have to show for it? No children, and careered, and prospects. You're 36 years old, and you're obsolete." His new wife, his pregnant new wife, shifted in her chair beside him. Natasha, 24 years old. A former intern at Julian's real estate firm who had been promoted to his personal assistant and then to his mistress and now, finally, to his wife. She was wearing a red bodycon dress that hugged her 7-month belly like shrink wrap, and she looked at me with a serene, satisfied expression of a woman who had won a prize she didn't yet realize was worthless. "She does look tired," Natasha said, her voice dripping with performative sympathy. "Julian, maybe we should offer her some money, a little something to help her get on her feet." "It's the right thing to do." Julian laughed. He actually laughed. "Sweetheart, she's not getting a cent. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. She signed away everything. The house, the cars, the savings, the investments. She walks away with exactly what she came in with, which, if I recall, was a suitcase and a lot of student debt." He leaned back in his chair, his hands folded behind his head. "I built everything we have, Camille. I was the one who worked 100-hour weeks. I was the one who closed the deals. I was the one who made the Sharp name mean something. You just existed. You were a placeholder, a housewife who couldn't even give me a child." I didn't flinch. I had learned over 10 years not to flinch. The first time Julian had called me a failure, 5 months into our marriage, when I'd burned his dinner because I was running 103-degree fever, I had cried for 3 hours. He'd apologized eventually and brought me flowers, and I believed him when he said he didn't mean it. The 10th time, I'd stopped crying. The 100th time, I'd stopped caring. But the child thing, that was new. That was the wound he'd been saving for the final blow. "You know why I couldn't have children," I said quietly. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. Julian's smile flickered. "Here we go. The tragic story, the accident, the surgery. It's been 10 years, Camille. At some point, you have to stop blaming external circumstances and accept that maybe you were just never meant to be a mother." "The accident," he said it like it was a fender bender. Not the night he'd insisted I drive to his office at 2 in the morning to deliver documents he'd forgotten in the middle of an ice storm because he had an early meeting and couldn't be bothered. Not the semi-truck that had jackknifed it across the highway. Not the emergency surgery that had saved my life but taken my ability to carry a pregnancy. He'd never once visited me in the hospital. He'd sent flowers with a card that read, "Get well soon, Jay." No signature. No love. Just a transaction like everything else in our marriage. "Let's just finish the paperwork," I said. "I have somewhere to be." Somewhere to be? Natasha tilted her head, her blonde extensions cascading over her shoulders. "What could you possibly have to do? Job interviews. You haven't worked in 10 years, Camille. No one's going to hire a middle-aged woman with no experience and a 10-year gap on her resume." "She could work at a coffee shop," Julian suggested. "Or a grocery store, something low pressure, something she can handle." He signed the last document with a decisive slash and pushed the papers toward the lawyer. "There, done. 10 years. Terminated. Go forth and be someone else's problem, Camille." I pulled the papers toward me. I picked up the pen, and I paused. "Before I sign," I said, "I have a question." Julian rolled his eyes. "Of course you do. What?" "The Sterling Tower project. The one you've been trying to land for 18 months. The one that would make Sharp Development the biggest real estate firm in the city. How's that going?" Julian's expression flickered. Surprise, then suspicion. "What do you know about the Sterling Tower project?" I know you haven't closed it. I know you've had 17 meetings with the Sterling Global Investment Committee, and every single one of them has ended with "we'll get back to you." I know you've been leveraged to the hilt for 6 months, waiting for this deal to come through, and if it doesn't close by the end of the quarter, Sharp Development is going to default on its loans. The color drained from Julian's face. How do you? That's confidential information. Who told you that? No one told me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I just know, because the Sterling Tower project was never going to go to Sharp Development. IT was always going to go to my company. Natasha snorted. Your company? You don't have a company. You're unemployed. You've been a housewife for 10 years. I've been a housewife for 10 years, I agreed. And before that, do you even know what I did before I married Julian? Did he ever tell you? She glanced at Julian. Julian's face had gone very still. Before I met Julian, I said, I was the founder and CEO of a small investment firm called Avenir Capital. You've probably never heard of it. We specialized in distressed asset acquisition. Buying failing companies, restructuring them, selling them for profit. By the time I was 26, Avenir had acquired 17 companies and generated over $2 billion in returns for our investors. This is absurd. Julian slammed his hand on the table. You were an analyst at a mid-tier firm. You told me you were an analyst. I told you I worked at Avenir Capital, that I let you assume I was an analyst because you were threatened by powerful women, and I was so desperate to be loved that I made myself small for you. I sold my shares in Avenir the month before our wedding and put the money into a blind trust because you said you wanted a traditional wife who stayed home and supported your career. So I became that I buried my ambition, my achievements, my entire identity because I thought that's what marriage required. I pressed a button on my phone. The conference room's television screen flickered to life, and the Sterling Global logo filled the display, a stylized silver tower against a dark background. 6 months ago, I continued. The blind trust expired. The assets reverted to my control, and I decided it was time to re-enter the market. So I called an old friend, Adrian Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global. We'd done business together before my marriage. He was very happy to hear from me. Julian stared at the screen. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. Adrian and I had lunch, I said. I told him I was interested in developing a new property, something iconic, something that would announce my return to the industry. He told me about the Sterling Tower project. He said he'd been taking meetings with various developers, but none of them had impressed him. He asked if I wanted to bid. I said yes. And last week, the Sterling Global Board voted unanimously to award the project to my new company, Vitrine Holdings. The conference room door opened. Adrian Sterling walked in, flanked by 2 attorneys and a notary public. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Julian's entire wardrobe. He looked at me, looked at Julian, and smiled. Camille, he said, I hope I'm not interrupting. Perfect timing, Adrian. I was just explaining to my ex-husband why Sharp Development didn't get the Sterling Tower contract. Adrian nodded and turned to Julian. Mr. Sharp, that we've met before, I believe, several times. In fact, you gave a very passionate pitch. Unfortunately, the committee felt that Sharp Development lacked the vision and the capital reserves necessary for a project of this scale. Vitrine Holdings, on the other hand, he gestured toward me, is backed by assets that considerably exceed your firm's entire portfolio. We're very excited about the partnership. Julian's face had gone the color of curdled milk. Vitrine Holdings, that's... Camille, you're telling me you own Vitrine Holdings, the company that just outbid me for Sterling Tower? The company that's been buying up distressed real estate all over the city for the past 3 months. I don't just own it, I said. I built it from the ground up. While you were busy calling me obsolete, I was negotiating a $2 billion development deal with one of the largest investment firms in the world. Natasha's serene smile had vanished. She was staring at the screen, her hand pressed against her belly, her face a mask of dawning horror. Julian, what does this mean? If you didn't get the sterling contract, what happens to the company? What happens to us? It means, I said, standing up and sliding the divorce papers back across the table, that Sharp Development is going to default on its loans by the end of the month. It means the bank will seize its assets. IT means Julian's empire, the one he claimed he built himself, is about to collapse. And it means that the prenuptial agreement he was so proud of, the one that left me with nothing, is going to look very, very different when he's the one with nothing and I'm the one with everything. Julian stood up so fast his chair tipped over. You planned this. You planned all of this. You've been waiting for this moment. For 10 years. I tilted my head. Yes, for 10 years, I've been waiting. For 10 years, I've been shrinking. For 10 years, I've been letting you call me a failure, a placeholder, a barren woman who couldn't give you children. And all that time I knew that the day would come when you would realize exactly what you threw away. You're not signing the papers, Julian said, his voice rising. You're not going to sign. You're going to drag this out. You're going to... Oh, I'm signing. I picked up the pen and scribbled my name across the final page. There, done. 10 years, terminated. You're free to be with Natasha, to raise your child, to build whatever life you can with whatever's left of Sharp Development after the bankruptcy proceedings. Julian grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles white. You can't do this. We were married for 10 years. Half of everything I have is... Half of nothing is nothing. I dropped the pen into my purse. You made sure of that. You are the one who insisted on the ironclad prenup. You are the one who structured every asset under your name, in your trust, in your company. You are the one who told me over and over that I had contributed nothing, that I was nothing. Congratulations, Julian. You finally got what you wanted, a wife who contributed nothing, and a divorce that gives her nothing. The only difference is I don't need your nothing. I have my own everything. Natasha stood up, her belly bumping against the table. What about the baby? Julian, what about our baby? You promised me. You said we'd be rich. You said. I said be quiet. Julian shook her off. His face was wild now, his eyes darting between me, Adrian, the lawyers, the television screen. Camille, listen to me. We can undo this. We can make a new deal. You want children? We can adopt or we can do surrogacy. I made a mistake with Natasha, a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. I can come back. We can start over. I looked at this man, this pathetic, desperate man who had spent a decade grinding me into dust, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. I felt nothing at all. The worst part, I said quietly, is that I would have stayed. If you had been kind, just kind, not even loving, just kind, I would have stayed forever. I would have buried my company, my ambition, my identity, and I would have been your placeholder for the rest of my life. But you couldn't even be kind. You had to be cruel. You had to twist the knife every single chance you got, and now the knife is in your chest, and I'm the one twisting it. I turned to Adrian. I'm ready to leave. Are the contracts ready for the Sterling Tower signing? Absolutely. Adrian gestured to the attorneys. We can finalize everything at my office. The press conference is scheduled for 3 o'clock. The mayor's office has already confirmed attendance. Press conference? Julian whispered. There's going to be a press conference? Of course, I said. The Sterling Tower project is the largest commercial development in the city's history. IT deserves a major announcement. And I deserve to be the one standing at the podium, accepting the accolades, while everyone who ever doubted me watches from the sidelines and wonders how they got it so wrong. I walked toward the door, Adrian beside me, the lawyers falling in behind us. At the threshold, I paused and looked back. One more thing, Julian, the accident, the one that took my ability to have children, that I spent 10 years blaming myself. 10 years thinking I should have been more careful, should have driven slower, should have done something differently, but I wasn't the one who sent me out into an ice storm at 2 a.m. You were the one who forgot your documents. You were the one who insisted I deliver them immediately. You were the one who called me lazy and useless when I hesitated. And you never once apologized, not once. You just sent flowers and called it done. Julian's face had gone gray. Camille, I never meant. Of course you didn't. You never meant anything. You just acted and took and destroyed and moved on. But I'm not destroyed anymore. I'm rebuilt. And I'm not moving on. I'm moving up. I walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Julian's voice crack into something that might have been a sob, and Natasha's shrill demands for explanations, and the lawyer's calm, professional voice discussing the implications of the default. None of it mattered anymore. None of it had ever mattered. The only thing that mattered was the woman I had finally, after 10 years, remembered how to be. The press conference was held in the Sterling Global Atrium, a soaring space of glass and steel that seemed to reach toward heaven. 200 journalists filled the room, cameras pointed at the podium where I stood beside Adrian Sterling, the signed contracts displayed on a massive screen behind us. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian said into the microphone, it is my great pleasure to announce the formal partnership between Sterling Global and Vitrine Holdings for the development of the Sterling Tower. This project will redefine the skyline of our city, create thousands of jobs, and represent a new era of architectural innovation. And at the helm of Vitrine Holdings is a woman whose vision and leadership have made this partnership possible, Ms. Camille Vitrine. The applause was thunderous. I stepped forward to the microphone, my hand steady, my heart full. 10 years ago, I said, I walked away from a successful career because I believed that love required sacrifice. I spent a decade trying to be what someone else wanted me to be, smaller, quieter, less ambitious, and it nearly destroyed me, but I learned something important from that experience. I learned that shrinking yourself for someone else's comfort is not love, it's erasure. And I learned that no matter how long you've been invisible, you can always choose to be seen again. I paused, letting the cameras flash, letting the silence stretch. Vitrine Holdings is not just a company, it's a statement. A declaration that women's ambition is not a threat, that women's success is not a punishment, and that women who have been told they are obsolete are often the most powerful people in the room. To every woman who has been called worthless, barren, or used up, this is for you. You are not what they say you are what you choose to become. The applause this time was even louder. I saw women in the audience standing up, clapping with their hands above their heads. I saw journalists wiping their eyes. I saw Adrian Sterling looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. The press conference ended. The contracts were signed. The champagne was poured. And as I stood in the center of the atrium, accepting congratulations from mayors and CEOs and industry leaders, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I knew who it was before I opened it. Asterisk Camille, please, I'm begging you. The bank call. They're moving to seize the house. Natasha left. She took everything she could carry and went to her mother's. I have nothing that I have no one. Please just call me that we can work something out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Julian asterisk. I stared at the message for a long moment. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of pain. Reduced to a desperate text from a man who had finally realized the cost of his cruelty. I typed back. Asterisk, you said I was obsolete. You said I had nothing to show for a marriage. You said I was a placeholder, but I was never the placeholder, Julian, you were. You are the placeholder for the life I was always meant to live, and now I'm living it without you. Asterisk. I blocked his number and put my phone away. Adrian appeared beside me, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. Everything okay? Everything is perfect. I took the glass. Thank you, Adrian, for everything. Thank me by building something extraordinary. He raised his glass to Vitrine Holdings, to the Sterling Tower, and to the woman who proved that the best revenge is success. We clinked glasses, and I looked out at the atrium, at the cameras, at the crowd of people who had come to witness my resurrection. Somewhere out there, Julian Sharp was sitting in an empty house, his company collapsing, his new wife gone, his future obliterated. And I was standing in a glass cathedral of my own making, surrounded by light and applause and the life I had finally reclaimed. Not because I was lucky, not because I was cruel, but because I had finally learned that the only person who could save me was the same person I had tried to bury. Myself. The Sterling Tower broke ground 6 months later. IT rose from the earth like a silver blade, 60 stories of glass and innovation, the tallest building in the city. I watched it grow from my office window at Vitrine Holdings, and I thought about the woman I had been. The one who drove through ice storms at 2 in the morning for a man who wouldn't visit her in the hospital. She felt like a stranger now, a ghost I had finally laid to rest. Julian Sharp declared bankruptcy 4 months after the divorce. Sharp Development was liquidated. The house was seized. He moved into a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood and started driving for a rideshare company. The last I heard, he was telling his passengers about the empire his ex-wife had stolen from him. Most of them gave him 1 star. Natasha gave birth to a son and named him Julian Jr. She sued my ex-husband for child support, but there was nothing left to take. She moved back in with her parents and started working as a receptionist. She sent me a letter once, pages of apologies and explanations and justifications. I didn't read it. And Adrian Sterling. Adrian became something I hadn't expected in a partner, not just in business, but in life. We were married 2 years after the divorce, in a small ceremony at his family's estate, and when I walked down the aisle, I walked towards someone who had never asked me to shrink. "Do you know why I love you?" he asked me on our wedding night. "Because I'm rich and powerful and very good at negotiating?" He laughed. "Because you were invisible for 10 years, and you still chose to become visible again. Most people would have stayed hidden. You didn't. You fought your way back into the light." That's the woman I fell in love with, the woman who refused to disappear. I kissed him, and I thought about the ice storm, the accident, the hospital bed, the divorce lawyer's office. All those years of darkness, all those years of silence, and now light and sound. And a future I had built with my own 2 hands. 10 years of invisibility. A lifetime of visibility ahead.